right, hello and welcome to PK's panel discussion on loyalty analytics, the metrics that matter in the customer journey. I'm Elizabeth and I'm part of PK's marketing team. And before we get started today, I'd just like to remind everyone that all attendees have been muted. We will be recording this event for future reference. And as this is a live panel discussion, we of course highly encourage all attendees to get involved in the conversation and leave any questions in the Q&A tool within the Zoom platform. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Clay Waltonhouse, PK's Managing Director of Integrated Loyalty Solutions.
Great, thanks Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. Super excited to be here today and appreciate you attending. We've got a great panel discussion for you. And as Elizabeth said, please use that Q&A feature, chime in, ask questions, add your thoughts as we go. We definitely want this to be interactive. So thanks for attending. Let's quickly talk agenda. Go to the next slide here. So we'll take a few minutes just to ground you in a bit about PK, who we are, what we specialize in, so that you have that context. And then we're really going to have a focused interactive discussion in 3 different areas. One will be more a macro level discussion around loyalty analytics, how we think about it, some trends in this space. And then we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts around how to set up loyalty analytics for success, before we then close out with more of a discussion around some of the emerging capabilities and trends around AI and what that can mean for us in terms of understanding customer behavior. And then at the very end of the panel, we will have some open Q&A time. So don't wait to add your questions in the Q&A function, but we will have more of an open discussion as time permits at the end. So with that said, let's do quick introductions to the panel here. So as Elizabeth said, my name is Clay Waltonhouse. I'm the Managing Director for our Integrated Loyalty Solutions. I've been working in this space for more than a decade with brands across many different industries, and work with all of our different functional SMEs within PK in their respective areas. Jess?
Yeah, so I am super excited to have you all joining us today for this hopefully nice midweek break and talking about something really passion point for me. So I work with Clay closely on the loyalty solutions, as well as with Brad and Heather on the analytics side. So I'm the loyalty analytics SME for PK, where we really kind of find that Venn and help build solutions for our clients. I'll turn it over to Heather.
Great. Thanks, Jess. I'm Heather Harris, and I lead our data science and analytics practice and work with this fine team on our loyalty engagements and standing up the AI parts of that.
And to close it out, I'm Brad Jackson. I help run our data and analytics function. My focus is in data pipelining and business insights specifically, and I partner with everyone else on this panel around loyalty analytics, building out solutions, and partnering with our customers to do that.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So to get us started, just a quick background on PK. We'll make this super brief. We are a customer-focused consultancy and digital services firm. We are global, and capabilities span customer-focused strategy and experience design work, and intelligence and analytics, which is where we're going to spend the bulk of today's conversation. Also touching on commercial platforms and building a lot of custom experiences for clients. So web experiences, mobile experiences, et cetera. We do this work across industries and have a global footprint, as I mentioned earlier. A little bit about what makes us unique. We do think of ourselves as being experts in the moments that matter. And a lot of the content of our work that will be germane to today's discussion in particular is around helping brands to really reimagine and redesign their customer engagement models. And so this provides a lot of opportunity for our loyalty expertise and doing this work across industries. You see a few examples on the right here. And I'll go to the next slide. And loyalty in particular has been an area of focus for us for more than a decade. It's something we're recognized in the market as a leader. And it's something that we put a lot of our own investment and time behind in terms of intellectual property and evolving our own capabilities and offerings in the space. And so with that as backdrop, one of the functional areas that we do a lot of work today is around analytics and intelligence. And today's conversation is really going to be focused on exactly that, how we bring better insights and understanding of the end customer to our clients and what that looks like in practice, as well as touching on some of the theory in terms of what we're trying to understand in the first place. So let's jump in. I think we're going to start off with Jess. Jess, I would love if you could just share with attendees today, a little bit, when we say loyalty analytics, what does that mean to you? And how do we think about that at PK?
That's a great, thanks for the tee up. Loyalty analytics is a fairly specific space that obviously, I think is of interest to all of us. It's sort of like the difficult thing that's in plain sight for so many brands. Loyalty is really difficult to measure. And, it really ultimately comes down to the fact that it's a human element. And so we think of loyalty as more of an outcome for your brand, not necessarily a program or even a strategy. It's how you're understanding the relationship that you're building with your customers and treating them over time and providing that service that is bespoke to specific, your target audience. So what we have here is a very simplistic diagram, but just to help kind of pull us into that loyalty analytics exercise space. We know that we need to build a measurement solution that includes some of those emotive qualities. And we can try to, whiteboard together indefinitely through, a million different emotions, but there is a nice process that you can take your teams through to start organizing these principles. So what we have on the left here is your kind of program ROI bucket. And on the right, you can see that, CX is going to be the underpinning of all emotional loyalty drivers. So think about, these are two kind of the head and the heart kind of ways to speak to your customers. And as you go through to building a measurement plan, you want to make sure that you're capturing both sides and not focusing too much on, ROI and financials or exclusively on that qualitative potential, research focus and CX. You really want to make sure that your CX is brought into your analytics landscape and they will work in harmony to drive CLV. So what we have here, of course, is a very, like I said, simplistic, diagram, but we know that there's so much underpinning this is that, all your data ecosystem is really going to be, brought into play here. Loyalty is the center of your organization, and it includes, the engine for all touch points. So you have your e-com and app, your point of sale transactions, all different channels, your loyalty platform itself, if you have one. Of course, CRM, very critical touch point in every organization. And then your financial third party and campaign metrics that are really going to be, real time and elusive in capturing kind of long-term insights. You want to make sure that you have all of the real-time data you can. And of course, this relies on the single source of truth for your customer. It's a difficult conversation for many brands, but you want to make sure that whatever you have, you're working with it. I think that the key here is to take action, and loyalty analytics is progress. It's a process. It's not, a one-time light you turn on, and incremental learning is important. And so you don't want to wait because things aren't perfect. No brand is perfect. If there's something on your roadmap, your customers don't necessarily know that. They might try to find more, they might go to your competitor and find an experience that works for them there. So whatever you have, I think, my recommendation for this landscape is just keep in mind that everyone's got bits and pieces of this ecosystem, and it's really important to focus on what you do have and make decisions and build insights and try to get to that long-term measurement plan from today's landscape.
Hey, Jess, we have a question in the Q&A, so thanks to that participant. Can you explain what CLV is for those who may not be familiar with that acronym?
Yeah, thank you for that. Customer lifetime value. So your lifetime value of customers may really depend on what industry you're in, what vertical. You may know or you may not know what that customer lifetime value is, but it represents the longevity of your brand's relationship. So think of Legos, right? Like this is a generational lifetime, and Lego's doing a great job right now with capturing the nostalgia that people feel from when they were young, and even into third generations. That customer lifetime value is a long tail, a very enormous scope, if you will. But it's also important to obviously keep in mind quarterly plans, year over year. But that goal, that dream state, is thinking about your customers as a whole and as a person that you want to keep around so that your brand sticks around. And it's really an investment that you're making in that relationship.
Jess, you said something there that really resonated for me, in terms of looking at customers through a more human lens. We talk a lot about how can brands do a better job of humanizing their view of the customer. And do you maybe have a couple examples of specific data points or categories of data that you've seen, be used in trying to humanize that view?
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question, right? So how can we actually quantify these emotions? There's a lot of activity in the market trying to, new whole areas of study. And, there's a practice called affective analytics. That's like emotional analytics, but that isn't what I'm recommending here. I think there are, practices where people are learning to read facial expressions, and, some movie studios are using that, and trying to understand how reactive, like what emotions people are having as they watch a film. To try to drive projections, but there's a lot of underlying biases there. And so that scope of practice is still really young. What I'm recommending that I've seen work is to ask your customers how they're feeling and build that into an omni-channel strategy. So you have their actual emotions. You can quantify what the context was. You can go back and study, okay, these were the moments that mattered for my key segments. And this is what their sphere of touch points were in that moment. So, if someone just downloaded the app and then they start engaging a lot, you may see that you're able to access and pull on what emotions are we pulling out of that customer. Are they feeling nostalgic? Are they excited to find, what's new and discover new things that the brand is providing? So there's definitely an opportunity to just ask your customers and build it into your strategy, whether it's through email or notifications or whatever touch points you might have. It's surprising how, people want to provide that information so that they get a better experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think just what you go ahead, Clay. What you touch on, we talk about the affective, emotional part. I think we see that people are really trying to get started with actually understanding what are my customers even doing now in terms of engaging with the brand. And there's an expectation now that we are engaging with your brand through mobile, through your website, in your stores, if you will, or even in programs or other events that you're hosting. And they want that experience that says, I see you, I know you, I hear you. And that's all about their engagement behavior and all their different touch points with your brand. And that's a great way that when we layer on the emotional attitude, motivational data that you're talking about, Jess, that you can really get to that holistic view of your customer.
Yeah, it's so important.
And that data is really important too.
And we'll talk about this too in a moment. It's so important to have it structured correctly to make the most of it. But there are also really nice tools that we can help put in place that are accelerators to drive, more insights out of the information you do have to help structure that, especially in the emotional side. Something I wanted to note here also is as you're building a measurement solution, it's so important to bring teams together to build that plan. I think, it's really difficult for analytics teams to understand the full business context unless they've really gone through the process with your business teams of what do we want to learn from this? What's important to know day to day versus in the long term? There's nothing wrong with building dashboards that people don't necessarily look at if they know the information and there's a process to, keep things in track. If nothing's going wrong and everyone understands that the trends are happening, that's okay. It's really, it's more important that everyone builds something that's meaningful. And analytics teams can't be enabled unless they're brought into the process. So that's something that I really wanted to call out as super helpful.
So that's
I think another component is that, we're existing in a world where the data and the platforms that underpin those data have existed for a period of time now. And most organizations have some hybrid of platforms they've had for a number of years, excuse me, platforms they've recently invested in, and being able to stitch all of that together to have that view. I mean, we can call it a 360-degree view of the customer, but that's really what we're getting at, right? When we start talking about loyalty and being able to measure that, it isn't something that just a loyalty program can provide, right? It's that there's this data ecosystem, which you can see there on the slide, that not only have people invested in recently, but have been investing in for years. So being able to pull that forward and being able to normalize it and then being able to get those insights off of it becomes critical to the process.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue. I'd love to kind of move forward and talk a little bit about, the execution here, right? With a little bit of the theory and a little bit of the strategy behind us. How do we actually start to move this capability forward? What have we seen companies do well? What have we seen companies struggle with that our attendees today might learn from?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts here. I'm going to move through these pretty quickly, but it's stepping back to just align different teams on terminology is so critical because we know that there are things, every business unit has an expertise, and some teams use words like persona and segment to mean the same thing, or they might mean dramatically different things. And you just don't know unless you have that conversation to step back to basics, say, okay, our personas are our qualitative caricature, or, whereas our segments are quantitative and they're labeled in our CRM or our GDP, whatever the case may be. Maybe they're flipped. Every brand has their own utilization of terms and segments like this, or ways of classifying their customers. But it's really important to have that, conversation forthright as you're building a measurement plan. Same thing with earned and owned data. Be careful with how you're using your data. Be careful with, maybe how telling your customers openly, this is how we plan to use your data. I think as we get into the future where so much more data is going to be activated, it's important to just be clear with your customers that something is, declared or earned. So, if I'm actively asked a question by a brand and I answer it, I know they've earned my trust. They've earned that data. But owned data could be potentially something that's inferred on the back end, and I may not necessarily be aware of it. So have that conversation within your teams, like what's off limits, what's possible to be used. Active and lapsed, these are key loyalty terms. Everyone wants active members, right? And lapsed members are the tricky one to bring back into the fold. Be careful with making a religion out of these definitions. Don't stick to them give yourself some wiggle room to find what's right. There might be a purchase window that makes sense. Try stretching it out, try condensing it, see what works, and have a little bit of flexibility in these definitions rather than feeling like you're stuck for the next 5 years with a certain definition. insights and reports. This is my favorite one. Everyone wants actionable insights, and they get a report, and it might be a dud. Honestly, I personally feel like almost every insight is actionable. It just depends on the eye of the beholder somewhat. Reports can be static and they might be deprecated. It doesn't necessarily add value, but an insight is by definition something that is unique and valuable. And engage and transact. So this is where, you know, teams often have different goals, and it's really tricky sometimes with, you know, loyalty pushes into that CX space, and engagement is really the bread and butter that keeps people feeling like they belong to a brand and ultimately drives transactions. So there's not an either or, it's not discrete. It really does, it's important to have you know, an open conversation with how these metrics might align in the long term, and allow space, you know, having that conversation will allow space for some more engagement tactics on strictly transactional channels and vice versa.
And Jessica, these are so important for us as a data science team when we come in to really align around terminology, because often our clients are marketers. They're on the marketing side of the house and have a whole different vocabulary than, say, a data scientist does. And you know, recently in a client, they already had something they were using called segments. They already had personas and they already had tiers, but they wanted us to group their members in a new way that they didn't slice them up before. So we, you know, would use the word groupings or cohorts, but it is so important to make sure everyone's aligned on what those definitions are and really what the approach under those definitions are as well. And then the whole thing about insights and reports. I mean, so many of our clients, when they come to us, they're data rich, but insights poor. And so we really help bridge that as well. So I do think that whole vocabulary terminology thing is such an important part of projects.
I can't.
And as it relates to those insights, I mean, I think the key there, and one of our points of view being, you know, so focused on experiences, how to bring the insights to the point of action, so that it isn't you're just serving up a dashboard that someone may or may not consume, but that it's deliberate within a business process or within some sort of loyalty process, so that it does then activate what the person needs to do in response to whatever metric we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And I've learned so much from working with Heather and Brad's teams on, you know, the data science principles, and that vocabulary just continues to evolve. So
Jess, one thing I'd love for you to maybe touch on briefly, I think you've got a slide on it next, is a little bit more about the emotional side of measuring loyalty. This is a hot topic in the space. It has been for a number of years, and yet it continues to be something that I think is evolving. There are tools out there that you can, you know, certainly use in the form of tiny pulse surveys, and you can build polling and quizzes into the customer experience to get customer provided information that gives you a read on emotional indicators. So the tool set is evolving here pretty rapidly, and I think that's exciting. But, you know, how are we maybe thinking about that on our end?
That's a great, can you see my screen? I'm sorry, my computer got locked up. So are you seeing the next slide?
Oh. Here, I can bring mine up, Jess.
There we go.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah, can you see it?
Yes.
Oh, great, thank you. Okay, so this is a typical example of an engagement ladder. So this is how we can start to build a framework for this emotional side of measurement. What we see here is representative for, you know, a brand A, but may not work for your brand. You know, we see on the left, functional experience is very much utility focused, saving time or money, simplifying, making things easy. A lot of brands are focused here. There's, you know, really what we're suggesting is there's a lot of room to improve. And so being a change agent in this space is a very exciting place for loyalty. Emotional experience, just feeling connected to the brand, allowing members to express themselves and feel recognized. life-changing experiences. Some brands may be able to get here. Being able to bring others together. You see a lot of community-driven, like Sephora programs that are really activating this super well, and Lululemon's another good one. And then driving macro impact. Very few brands can get to this point, but what I wanted to lay out here is that this is customer-centric. So there's another framework you might have seen where you have like your muse and its concentric circles to, you know, kind of describe the outer rings as your customer base grows, but becomes less connected and central to your brand advocates in the middle. That view is business centric. So it's really important to just kind of step back and rethink things through the lens of your customer, back to the bare bones, and try to strip it back and say, like, is this customer focused or is this business focused? So your framework should reflect the customer. And this is the nice exercise to kind of think through where your brand's levers sit, because often, like I said, a lot of benefits and rewards are currently focused on that functional side. Maybe there's some kind of drip benefits into the emotional experience. So that's one lens, an exercise that might be kind of fun for you to take your teams through, like kind of where are we today and how can we push that a little bit further? Another lens is how are we differentiating for members? Often, you know, people maybe prefer to be a guest and not log in. That's fine. But a lot of people, you know, when asked or prompted, want that personalized experience, and they expect differentiation. So there should be a really crystal clear difference at each phase that can pull people in and help you move your customers up that engagement ladder. And the idea here is, again, just we're not trying to suggest that everyone can be changing the world with these grand, you know, sense of ownership and feeling enabled in the macro impact side. We're really saying that your customers may fit in one bucket, and you can probably help them tease their way into another layer of connection with your brand over time.
Yeah.
We're building this lifetime.
One simple idea that I do think undercuts all of this is the idea that brands need to understand where they fit in customers' lives more holistically, which is to say there may be ways to add value in the context of those people's lives that extend beyond the core product or service that you're monetizing. And understanding that bigger picture, I think, is a key aspect to kind of moving up this ladder that you laid out here, Jess, in terms of building relationships that are likely to provide an emotional response. There was a question from an attendee about, you know, what might an example be of a macro impact. Anyone on the panel have an answer for that?
Yeah, I have an example. I think I won't name names, but I've worked with a brand recently who, you know, is really trying to steward their enterprise goals for carbon neutrality. This is a 10-year goal, and you know, the brand has made it very public that they want to achieve this, and they've actually been successful with prior goals like this. So how can they activate their members to really bring everyone into this goal and drive that sense of purpose that, you know, the collective can be more than the individual parts, that activates that emotion in a way that, you know, we see more and more brands really diving into values and reinforcing the values like that maybe used to be taboo for brands to stake a claim in, but more and more it's what customers expect.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to keep
and it's almost in we have another example where it isn't you know, when viewing loyalty, it isn't just about that person's loyalty to the brand, but the brand's loyalty back to the community in which they serve. And so that's another perspective on it. How do we provide that service back to our members in a more holistic, meaningful way to them that helps move needles, you know, at a social level even.
Right, love it.
And then we'll talk about later the differentiators and how AI can help hone in on those differentiators and be a proxy for that emotional engagement and really see that customer journey through that lens.
Great. So let's dive into the second topic here, which is really about the practical, how do we do this? How do we move up this maturity curve? How do we develop this capability? And obviously it's different for every company, but what are some of the things that PK has learned? And Brad, I think you've got some ideas on this topic. So I might tee you up by just asking, you know, what are some of those fundamentals? What are some of those challenges? What are some of the pitfalls that you see out there?
Well, I think kind of measuring any aspect of the loyalty program is any good place to start. And so that can be a measurements around any of those levels that Jess pointed out here on the emotional engagement slide. It could start out as simple as we want to understand points redemption, right? So you can have something that is that kind of tactical, and any starting point is okay as it relates to that. But with, you know, like we talked about a minute ago, there are so many systems that measure these transactions that the customer is taking with the brand, whether it's a sales transaction, whether it's a view of a web page, whether it's a click through on a marketing campaign. Each one of those things has a platform behind it, and that data is being captured, and it needs to be brought forward in such a way that then analysts can do something with it. That could be looking at a report, or it could be, and then taking appropriate action, or it could be doing something more sophisticated around behavioral segmentation and, you know, some of the work that Heather will get into here in a minute. But it does start with kind of understanding, okay, what do we have? And what are the systems? Where is the data? And then making a decision on where we start.
And Brad, just to plant this seed as you get into this here, there was a question from the audience about the types of platforms, you know, that are typically playing a role in building this capability. So maybe as you dig in, you might touch on that a bit more.
Sure. Well, you know, the landscape, by the way, and I'm sorry to everybody, is so cluttered and very confusing. And everybody has a canned solution that gives you exactly what you need. So you're gonna see a lot of content out there. But we might be talking about something like, it could be a loyalty platform, meaning a platform that helps you manage programs, points, redemptions, that sort of thing. Or it could be an e-commerce platform that measures how people are transacting and purchasing with your organization. Or it could be a legacy point of sale system that's measuring a retail transaction. It really could be anything. So when we talk about platforms, it isn't just platforms related to loyalty. It's all platforms that measure business transactions. It's all platforms that store data, and it's all platforms that serve up those data for insights. So I'm sorry.
And those platforms are only as good as the data, right, Brad?
Always. So unfortunately, it's not a very direct answer. It's, but that's because it's a sea of things that have evolved over time, serving multiple purposes.
And each of those platforms have great capabilities in certain areas, but often what will happen is my team will be brought in to extend the insights that those platforms can provide and move the needle even more.
This may help also kind of as you're thinking through the long-term process. Because there is, as Brad said, there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, but yeah, go back to yours, Jess, because I think it's go back to the prior one if you could.
Sorry, there we go.
I think that it is meaningful to think of it in terms of, so when I said there's lots of technologies kind of cluttering the field, you know, you can think of those as the inputs, right? So when we're talking about, we want to measure something with our customers, what are the different inputs for that? So that could be a variety of systems. On the next slide, we'll show you what those might be, and I've alluded to a couple of them. But from those inputs, the data has to be normalized in a particular way. If you just even think about your own organization, you've got something that captures how you're transacting with your customer, something that maybe captures how you're executing your loyalty program, points and redemptions. It could be something that captures web traffic or how they respond to campaigns. You can be almost certain that all of those platforms are not keying your customer in a unique way, right? Or they are within their own platforms, but there's no way that they're being brought together or normalized. So almost 100% of our customers, even the very sophisticated technology companies, are having a hard time of mapping all of those different systems to a single customer ID to then have that holistic view, the 360-degree view of customer behavior. So think through the inputs, think through the logics that would be required to capture those things, but also how are we going to normalize that to a unique customer for each of those systems. That then gives you the ability to visualize results on dashboards or push data back to other applications. If you could advance one slide.
Yeah.
It's another picture of this, which is too technical and we'll move past it quickly, but I just wanted to give you a visual representation of the complexity at play there.
Oh, my Zoom is really struggling here.
There it is. So you can see, I don't know if there's some animation that's missing there, but from those data sources, yeah, they're fading in slowly. You can see that, you know, some of them are loyalty, some of them are sales transactions, some of them are kind of your traditional CRM or customer relationship management applications. Some of them are from third-party and social sources, and some of them are from, frankly, external data that someone else may be monitoring or housing or controlling themselves. All of that comes through into, see that grid in the middle? That is a matrix of all of the different, I guess, business dimensions and subject areas that would be relevant to any loyalty analytics initiative at a holistic, comprehensive level. Almost none of our customers achieve completeness of the matrix, right? There's so much there. But what we're really looking for is on those business insights, what are the KPIs that are monitoring the health of the program? And then what are those advanced features that monitor more about our customers' emotional engagement with the brand? And Heather, that's a tee up for you.
One quick comment here that I would make is, you know, we all are aware of the many three-letter acronym platforms that are coming on the market every year. And, you know, CDP obviously is a hot one, right? Because it helps, in theory, it helps solve for this problem of unifying and normalizing data across the ecosystem and trying to build more rich and complete profiles at a customer level. One of the challenges we see, and Brad, you've touched on this, is the platform itself still needs to be passed all the right data across that ecosystem, right? And so there's still a lot of orchestration work and integration work that is often involved in, you know, building and integrating, putting this in quotes, a CDP solution, whatever that means to you. If you're buying a CDP, you know, as a third-party product off the shelf, if you're building something, and there's a whole bunch of tools out there that could play this kind of role with varying degrees of maturity. But typically where we're finding a lot of the hangups to be is in that integration and the broader orchestration across kind of the full stack, multiple talforms of all these various kinds that Brad has laid out here.
Yeah, and then when you talk about,
go ahead, Heather, sorry.
You talk about the emotional part of it, Brad, that you were mentioning, and something that Brad and I both focus on is human-centered BI, humans, business intelligence, human-centered insights, human-centered AI, and where that comes into play when you look at a diagram like this where there's so much, it's really beginning with and being able to prioritize those most compelling, most actionable insights that the business needs and prioritizing the roadmap around your data ecosystem to get you there so that you can be developing insights at the same time that you're pulling this ecosystem together and moving up the maturity curve in your data.
There was a chat that came in for the Q&A. The question was, what is a CDP, or can we confirm what that is? It's a customer data platform, and there are a number of players in the space that provide that as an additional platform within the ecosystem that helps normalize customer data so that you can have like a customer-oriented system of consolidation and profiling for customers that integrates with other systems within your MarTech stack. That's the CDP. As opposed to an enterprise data warehouse, which you may have also heard of, which is more of a agnostic data store that has been normalized for the purposes of consolidating all kinds of data, not just customer related data.
Hey, Brad, one question I'd love to toss your way in this conversation around more of the capability building within an organization. How are organizations themselves changing? So are you seeing new ways of teaming, new ways of structuring, new skill sets that are required to push this sort of work forward? What are the observations you've made there?
Almost universally, you have a decentralization of analytical skills across organizations. 10, 15 years ago, for sure, it was mostly centrally controlled through IT, but what has happened over the years has been this kind of more of a hub and spoke model, where you have teams that are building out their analytical capabilities. In the case of loyalty, that might be a marketing team that has hired their own data scientists and their own data analysts to help piece together the data for advanced insights, and then to be able to adapt to their internal needs faster than something that's more centrally governed. So what you see is a lot more analytical capability spread across an organization. And then oftentimes in that world, our role is to help kind of bring everything back together so you still have a single version of truth and control over those metrics and how they're defined.
Another area, Clay, that we've seen things change has to do with, lines of business that historically may not have worked together on analytics projects. So for example, during this pandemic, the marketing teams are actually now quite interested in what supply chain is doing, because customer experience is so centered around that supply chain being able to keep up in COVID times. And then also in the travel industry, we see that the operational side of the house, how that travel experience is delivered, greatly impacts customer experience. So now operations and marketing are talking more often as well.
I find that trend so fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's back office functions and corporate operations have now become part of the customer experience. Right? And logistics, so true. And distribution, and all of these things are now differentiators that the modern customer cares about. And it just places a really bold, sharp underline under the imperative to structure around customer value, right? And people talk about value chains and the importance of understanding value chains, within an enterprise. So I love that comment, Heather. I think that's a fascinating trend. So let's keep moving a little bit here. I want to make sure we have some time to get into some of the fun stuff around some of the more emerging trends. So Heather, why don't we jump to your section around how behavioral profiling is evolving and some of the work we're doing. And I'll maybe do a quick tee up here and then you can really jump in. Marketers have been using first-party data, right? Observable data for a long time. So that's not new. Segmentation, like we were discussing earlier, is a tool that marketers have used for a long time to drive targeted marketing and to some extent personalization, and increasingly so personalization. But as we think about understanding customer behavior, and especially this idea of humanizing a view of who our customers are so that we understand how better to improve loyalty with that customer base. What are you seeing? What does that look like? What are some of the trends? How does that play?
Sure, let's start with the why. Jess, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll just tee this up quickly. And a lot of this folks understand today, but really what we're getting at is helping marketing teams understand what will happen. What can I do to proactively act on that? So in other words, not just reporting on, how my members engaged over the last month and what content they engaged with in this last year, but really knowing that a demographic like age 20-25 watch specific videos, and if they watch a specific video, they're likely to make a transaction. Really tying that engagement with the brand and bringing it together with the business side of the house, but then also for that exceptional customer experience. And then what can we do to predict and prescribe certain actions? So we can go ahead and we can go to the next slide, Jess. I won't spend a ton of time on the data value chain, but what we have so much, as we talked about, rich customer data available to us. And this is where AI and machine learning shine, because we're talking about millions and millions of customers with really rich data sets, lots and lots of things we know about them. So how do we wrap our mind around all of it? And this is where we use the power of compute. But before that, one of the things that we've done really well at PK, because we have so much loyalty expertise and customer expertise, it's how do we actually develop the right view of that data to do the machine learning to begin with. So we have some crafted methodologies that create new variables, and I'll talk about that in the next slide, so that we can create clustering and segments that are very actionable and help you see, what do I want to do to get to that next behavior? Or how do I want to make this group look more like that group because I like their behavior? But we let the data emerge those groups based on the touch points with the brand, touch points with the different channels, the touch points with product. And as you have the data, Clay, you talked about, and Brad, you also talked about, I think all three of you have talked about how customers now care about other things in their communities too, and bringing in other outside data sources. But it's really about getting to those engagement patterns in a predictive way so we can prescribe what do I want to do around retention strategies, and not just in general, but for specific cohorts and populations of my members. We can go to the next one, Jed. Any comment or questions on that?
Heather, what is feature engineering? Because this is actually a whole area of machine learning that was new to me until you explained it. So I would love to help explain that for folks not familiar.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Thank you. See, this is where Jess keeps me honest in the loyalty space and talking to non-technical people. So actually, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to use that to help describe it, because what we do is we have all this raw data about our customers. Like, for example, we have the content that they're engaging with. So we divide the different pieces of data into new variables, if you will, about our customer. And it could be what time of day they're engaging, what channels they interact with, and craft that out in a way that helps us differentiate better. And we use some of our, subject matter expertise around customer and customer behavior to come up with these new variables. So feature is just a fancy word for another piece of data, but it's one that we've handcrafted based on the raw data.
So Heather, if I maybe use some more old school CRM terms here, we're essentially coming up with new attributes that will be scored against a customer record, right? And so you're looking at the data, you're letting some of these clusters emerge, you're seeing where that leads us in terms of insights, and then we're coming up with a new, to use your word, variable that gets recorded against that customer. And then that allows us to look at that customer differently, more easily going forward.
Yeah, attribute's the perfect word. Again, it comes back to that whole terminology thing we talked about earlier. And not only to score them, but to actually let the machine decide how to cluster people based on these new attributes. And we tend to know how to carve out attributes in a way that can create more robust or more actionable clusters is what we're looking for.
And one thing I'll just comment that I think is interesting about how data science in this space is emerging is, traditionally, as Jess was saying earlier, marketers might go out and do a market research project, primary research, right? Mm-hmm. And we might go field a big survey and do some focus groups. And we still, at PK, we do a lot of that work still. because it is important, and we can maybe touch on that in a few minutes. But
Absolutely.
This is almost, it's trying to get at the more human understanding of who our customers are using the full ecosystem of data that's available. And I think, that does represent where a lot of both the heavy lifting is from a data ecosystem perspective, as Brad was talking about, but also really represents where a lot of the kind of emerging value is around data science and customer-focused marketing.
And going back to that holistic ecosystem of data, and as Brad talked about, all the different touch points and data points you have available, often these projects will be layered or in phases where we start with a specific aspect of the brand or of their content, and we get insights there and we layer in data as it becomes more mature, more available, because what we want to help our clients do is get to insights faster without waiting for the huge project to be done around the perfect CDP, right? Because it's evolving. Your data is going to constantly evolve. So it's setting up an ecosystem that allows for that maturity as you go. So Brad and his team come in and they set up that core foundation that you can then build upon over time and get to these insights and layer them in.
And frankly, most customers have pieces of it in place already, right? So oftentimes, there may be a 60% already covered, and then it's really about filling in portions of the remaining 40 and making them work together. And so it's more of assembling those Legos.
We can go on to the next slide, I think, Jess, unless there's some more questions or discussion. And because this is really the output of, say, this is actually a merge of several clients, because I didn't want to, reveal the insights of any specific client, but just to give you a flavor of what might come out. And getting into that whole lingo thing, some might call these clusters or segments or even personas, depending on what the client language is at the time. But what has happened here, if we tease this one out a little bit, you can see that what the data was clustered, and then we reported on what were some of the different values or characteristics of those clusters after the machine put these folks together based on these really sophisticated statistical techniques. We then report across and say, we can see trends. For example, let's look at our high value on the right. Well, different than all the other clusters, these folks got grouped together, and we see that their annual spend is the highest. So they're our highest value cluster. So we might look at this cluster and look more deeply at what kind of products they're purchasing, which you can kind of see. I put these product categories of A, B, and C, and we see, oh, they're purchasing a lot of A. And so how can we get other clusters? Maybe we can get our typicals that are at about half the spend. Maybe if we promote more of product A, we can move them up to be more like our high value, for example. That's a very simplistic analysis of it or interpretation, but it gives you a sense of how we actually turn these into marketing treatments, or what we call marketing programs or target marketing around what we're seeing in the data. This first one on the left, the late night shoppers, was based on a project where we saw one particular cohort that was clustered together. The machine learning picked up on the fact that these people shopped in the middle of the night. and they were their own kind of behavior and cohort, and they had a pretty significant spend. So it was worth looking at. And then I see a question from attendee. What do numbers above average product A, B, and C indicate? Oh, so it's the average number of product. In this particular one, it was the average number of items in each of those categories. I think per annual spend was the example. And again, this was a simplified version of some real results that came out for clients to show you how it works. But Jess and Clay, one of the things we often talk about is this is a very data-driven view, which is super valuable and super actionable, but there's still sometimes that desire to get to the attitudes and the motivations behind clients. And this is where there's still that space for those qualitative surveys you talked about, Clay.
Absolutely. I think we often find that the richest insights projects we do are just that, right, Heather? They're a combination of more of these leading data science methods along with primary research that helps build out not only a more complete view of kind of the behavioral profile, but also helping us explain why people behave the way they do. Why are there these late night shopper groups? What is that all about? Why are people shopping in the middle of the night? Is that just who they are? Or is there a functional explanation of why that might be happening? And is there something our brand's doing maybe that's leading to that behavior? So what I really love about this slide is it starts to connect some of the things I think brands are struggling with, or at least needing to more completely understand, which includes the relationship between things like engagement with content. So your second row about videos and interactions with videos and viewings. How does interaction with content and even specific kinds of content relate to other behavioral traits we care about, like on a practical basis, spend, or on a more aspirational basis, NPS or brand affinity, or likelihood to advocate for the brand, right? So I think being able to connect those dots with this sort of method is incredibly insightful and a big part of where a lot of our work is going in this space. So watching the clock a little bit, I know we're nearing the end, and I did want to thank everybody for attending today and jump to our recap slide briefly here.
I can.
While Jess is going there.
Really struggling here. There we go.
So just I'll voice it over while you're pulling it up. One more slide, Jess. Thanks. So you will receive a follow-up email. So again, thank you for joining today. We saw, almost all of you stayed for the full hour. So we hope you got some really meaningful insights out of this. In that follow-up email, there will be a recording of today's webinar, as well as a data sheet on our loyalty analytics work, in case that is of interest to you. There's also the opportunity to schedule a one-to-one briefing with us. So that would include an opportunity to engage with folks on the panel here personally, as well as other subject matter experts across PK. And then, of course, you can always visit the website. We've got a ton of our market perspectives and insights, including a lot of content around loyalty and data science and where this space is headed specifically. So with that said, I think there are a few more questions in the chat. I'm not sure we're going to get to them today, but definitely appreciate those questions. Would be happy to follow up offline. And thanks again.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.